you so much for that. No, Alex, thank you for that. And the choir, I don't know if you noticed just how they were embodying, excuse me, what they were singing, and it's just beautiful to see, right? It's beautiful to witness people really holding and knowing and embodying their faith. And so today, I want to share with you a little bit about this positive path that we call unity, and invite you to really consider where you're at with these principles. And if there are any areas within your own life where maybe these principles are calling you to a greater embodiment of them, right? And just to check in about where you're at with them. One of the things that I love about unity is that we get to have free will, right? Like nobody is telling you, nobody is telling us, you have to believe these things. We're simply saying, this is what we have come to understand. This is what has come to play an active role in us living abundant, meaningful lives. And if you want to experience it, because you may not be experiencing it, try it out. See how it fits into your way of being, and practice with them in such a way that you are looking to experience the ways in which it's working, right? And so, as I mentioned, we're going to be doing this in two parts. Today, we really want to talk about the nature of God and the nature of us as individuals, and how that relates to whatever we may be going on, or whatever may be happening and going on in our own lives, right? At the core of unity really is a deeper understanding of the nature of God. And if we get that, however we get it, I think we all will live lives that feel meaningful, that feel supported and comforted. And so this is the invitation for today. Now, I also have another invitation for you, which is that if you are new to unity, if you are wanting to just get reacquainted with some of the principles and really ask ourselves, like, how can I live this out more fully? We're starting a course starting on Monday the 30th. It's a 5-week course on the 5 unity principles. And so Reverend Anna and I will be facilitating that course. It's a great way to jumpstart the year so that you're really solid in creating that foundation from which everything else will flow. And if you have any questions on it, you can see me after the service, or you can go to our website and already register for it. Now with that, I want to tell you about 3 people who passed away and went to heaven and saw St. Peter there. And the moment that they got to the pearly gates, these individuals, show up and are trying to figure out, well, what's next, right? And so St. Peter says to the first man, well, welcome to heaven. Welcome to heaven. Just one really quick question. Back on earth, what denomination were you? And the first guy says, well, I was a proud Presbyterian. And St. Peter goes, oh, that's great, excellent. Go to door number 10, but just when you're passing through door number 2, just make sure that you're really, really quiet. So the first man goes. The second one comes up, and St. Peter says, well, what about you? What denomination were you? And the gentleman says, oh, well, I was a great and proud Methodist. And the St. Peter says, well, that's awesome, that's great. Now continue to go to door 7, but when you pass door 2, just be very, very quiet. The third person goes up and says, well, I was a Buddhist. And St. Peter says, that's great. Go to door number 4, but when you pass door number 2, just be very, very quiet. So finally that guy says, well, wait, but St. Peter, what's going on door 2? It's like, oh, well, that's where the Catholics are, and they think they're the only ones up here. It's just so interesting because so many different faith traditions, right, like have their own understanding about, well, no, this is the way. This is the way, right? As I said, one of the things that I think is really beautiful about unity is that we really honor all paths. And we understand that all paths will lead to a deeper understanding of the God of our being. And all paths have some clues, really, and some moments and some golden nuggets that we can learn from. And that's exactly what the Unity co-founders, Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, did. They went out and they looked at all the world religions and philosophies and asked themselves, what is it that brings them all together? What unites all of them? And what we have in Unity as a path or as a philosophy is what they came to understand. Charles Fillmore said this about Unity: "We have studied many isms, many cults. People of every religion under the sun claim that we either belong to them or have borrowed the best part of our teaching from them. We have borrowed the best from all religions. That is the reason that we are called Unity." And in that, in the reflection and in the studying and in the thirst to answer some of life's more complicated questions, the Unity movement began. And it's questions that probably brought you to this very space also, because it's the questions that people have been asking for eons. It's the questions that have always been alive in us, and we have, if we're really honest with ourselves, brought things into our lives to try to answer those questions. The questions like, for example, what is this presence that we feel around us? What do we call it? What is it? How do we connect with it? How is it that we are feeling it in this moment? How is it that it can be made known to us? How do we communicate? Who are we? What are we? Some of us continue to ask ourselves these questions, and it continues to sort of unfold. The answer continues to unfold for us. What are we even here for? So many times we have a dark night of the soul, right? And we ask, well, what is the purpose of all of this? Sometimes we're moving through life's challenges and difficulties, and we ask ourselves not only what is the purpose of this, but what is my purpose in it? Why is this taking place? We ask, why are things happening in our lives the way that they do? And really, Unity as a philosophy looks to respond to those questions and really opened itself up to not only a positive, practical, and progressive way of Christianity, but really answering the question, what is it that can bring that level of positivity into our existence? How is it that we're able to tap into that presence and be able to experience it in not only a greater way for ourselves, but then be able to share it and have others experience it through us? The spirit of Unity itself, as it was birthed, is of asking these questions and continuing to be comfortable with questioning the answers that we even get. You see, it's a philosophy that continues to ask itself, do we believe what we believe? And if so, is it that we and our practices need to change, or that our beliefs need to change? And it's a philosophy that our co-founder, Charles Fillmore, said, I have the right to change my mind. I reserve the right to change my mind. And that's a right that all of us have. If you're like me, you probably use that right because you weren't born into Unity. Many of us, most of us, aren't born into Unity. But something about the way that we were raised or a philosophy of our past led us to ask other questions and led us to recognize that there was something else. And we found some of those answers here, or we've at least been given the opportunity to continue to be in the questions here. We reserve the right to change our mind, and the Unity philosophy has continued to evolve, maybe in the language that we use. Many of us have heard of the 5 Unity principles. Anybody heard of the 5 Unity principles? Okay, a couple of hands went up. I'm glad we're doing this at the beginning of the year, huh? I learned once a couple of years ago, I was like, oh, it'll be so much fun if I go out into the audience and ask people what the 5 Unity principles are. Don't worry, I'm not doing that today. But I really want you to get at the core of what they mean and how you can apply them in your life. And if you want to go deeper into it, to join us in the class. But, we've treated in Unity, these 5 Unity principles, almost like if it was, like on the tablets that Moses received on Mount Sinai. But the reality is that they've only been around since the 90s. Because before the 5 unity principles, Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, co-founders, would just teach and write books about their philosophy. And so many people started getting connected to them. And actually, it was more like the evangelicals around them that felt like unity had to define itself. Although Charles and Myrtle Fillmore weren't necessarily looking to define themselves as a philosophy, everybody around them was asking them to. And so Charles Fillmore actually wrote what were the 32 statements of faith. And, they were written in the 1920s. So unity was founded in 1889. In the 1920s, these 32 statements were written. And some of them, if we were to read them today, would sound very much like our philosophy. The first one, we believe in God, the one and only omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent God mind. Guess what? When Connie Fillmore, the great-granddaughter of Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, was asked to bring those statements and concise them into 5, or something that was a little bit more open and more easily accessible to people, that became the first unity principle, that God is absolute good, everywhere present. And it became the basis for everything else. Because that truly is, if you think about it, and if you want to be honest with ourselves, if we don't know the nature of God, then we don't know the answers to many other things. Because first and foremost, the foundation of our lives is our experience of God, our understanding of God. It is what moves us. It is what moves us in a way where when we know those things, when we are sure about them, it brings about certain ways of being in our lives. And when we're in the questions where we don't know, where there is fear, where there is a misunderstanding, that also has an effect on how we live out our lives. Now, Ellen Davenport, who is the writer of a book called The 5 Principles, wrote this: "If I had one wish for the world, it would be that every adult re-examine their view of God at least once per decade. God may not change, but people do, and we outgrow our old concepts." What old concepts of God have we clung to in the past and have been able to release? But also, what old concepts of God are still alive within us that we may not be conscious of? Or we may be conscious, but we haven't done the work to really release ourselves from the bondage of that old way of thinking. I know that many people that come to Unity are already ready to learn, to know, and to live in a world where God isn't a punishing God or a judgmental God, one that is sitting on a throne somewhere saying, this is good, this is bad, you are good, you are bad. And let's be honest, how many of us still have inklings of that God within us? If we feel shame, if we feel guilt, there may be something for us to heal in the way that we see and experience God. Because in Unity, what we believe about God is that God is principle. God is this energy, this force that is good. In absolute good, there is nothing to forgive. There is nothing to judge. For the only thing that is seen and that is felt and experienced is the good that is within us, is the good that is around us. And when we talk about God as absolute good, we recognize that not everything that we experience may feel good, right? So don't hear me out. I'm not saying that just because in Unity we believe that God is absolute good, everywhere present, and that all power that is in the universe doesn't mean that our experiences reflect that. But it means that there is something that we can lean on. It means that when things get hard, when things get difficult, when we do judge ourselves, when we judge others, when we are in the midst of the dark night of the soul or the experiences of fear and separation, that we can turn back and say, wait a minute, God is absolute good. Absolute good is the spiritual realm of all things. And in that process, we are able to reshift the way that we see our experiences and we see ourselves. That God is principle, that it is unchanging, that no matter what we do, who we are, how we show up in the world, that does not change God, does not change our relationship with God, does not change the way that God is good and is that force that is behind it all. Now, there is divine reality, spiritual reality, and then there's the human experience. How many of you have recognized that those two sometimes don't feel the same? It's the human condition. And so many of how we have defined ourselves is based on this idea of the relative world. In the relative world, there is judgment. In the relative world, there is good and bad. In the relative world, there is good and whatever we want to classify as evil. But that is not the realm of God. That is not the realm of spirit. And so the moments that we are so stuck in that which is not permanent, that which is that human experience of the senses, we can just step back and say, wait, that can be our experience, but that is not the absolute reality of what is going on. And we can do the work to trust the absolute reality of what is going on. The absolute reality of what is going on is that there is good showing up, that God is present at all times, and that within us is everything that God is, so that we can move through whatever it is that we need to be moving through, so that we no longer are in bondage to the relative world, but through the absolute good that is in the spiritual realm, we can show up in the relative world armored with truth, with awareness, with a mindfulness of the presence of God. If there is any fear that is going on within us, if there is any sense of lack or limitation, all we have to do is stop looking at the relative world and remember that absolute good is present, for God is always present, and ask ourselves then, how is it then going to show up? What is it that I must do in order to refocus the way I am seeing this experience and be able to show up in the awareness that God, the good, all power, all presence, has something in store for me, has something in store to show up for me and for us. And so really it's our consciousness that sometimes keeps us away from recognizing the absolute good. How do we clean up that consciousness? How do we allow ourselves to be much more clear, a clear vessel for that absolute good to show up in our lives, to have that shift in perspective from the world of senses to the viewpoint of God the good? Now with that, we do realize that we may not call it evil in unity as much, because we don't like to use certain words because they have a lot of stuff connected to them, right? But in unity, it's not that we don't believe in evil. We simply don't believe that it is a power equal to the power of good. There is no devil that is as powerful as God. There is no power like evil that can keep us from our good and the absolute good of life and of God and of our own being. But we've maybe just misunderstood. Maybe the consciousness is such that it's not fully allowing that absolute good to be expressed fully in our lives. And so all of a sudden we do have the missing of the mark, sin. The word sin in the Bible, the original context of it was just missing the mark. We had a misstep. We misunderstood. Don't get me wrong. Some people miss it by a mile. Don't get me wrong. I've missed it by a mile. And it's just a misstep. It's a misunderstanding of truth. And when we come to realize that, we really are allowing ourselves to forgive. We're really allowing ourselves to recognize that there is nothing more powerful than the presence of God, than the presence of love. And that love can be that tool of forgiveness that brings us back to center, brings us back to wisdom, brings us back to knowledge, and brings us back to recognizing the oneness that is. Because the misstep, the major misstep, is of forgetting that God is absolute good and forgetting that we are connected to that source, which brings us to the second unity principle. And the second unity principle that says human beings have a spark of divinity within them, the Christ Spirit. Their very essence is of God and therefore inherently good. Take a moment right now. When I share with you that you are inherently good, that every single individual that is in this world is inherently good, the nature of us is good, what does that bring up for you? Can you own it? Can you accept it? If you could you release any guilt or shame or judgment about how you've shown up? This second principle really invites us to do the work of seeing that Christ's essence in us. And first and foremost, in us. How are we honoring that Christ's presence? If God is absolute good and everywhere present, then we are also inherently good. That God is everywhere present, including in us. How are we honoring it? How are we living it? How are we allowing it to be expressed in the world? How are we sitting with it? How are we comfortable with it? And also recognizing then that it truly invites us to see other people as an extension of that. The people that push our buttons, the people that we would like to judge and call evil, difficult, challenging, doesn't mean that what they're doing feels good. It doesn't feel that what they're doing is necessarily an expression of good. I'm not saying that. I'm simply saying, can we look beyond that and react or respond in a way that honors their good? That they also are children of God that may be hurting. How many of us have shown up in the world, maybe not in the best light sometimes, because we were afraid, because we were hurt, because something within us didn't want to believe that we were inherently good. Maybe because feeling inherently good felt too difficult of a responsibility. And so we pushed it away. The moment that we can really own that God is everywhere present, and therefore in me and in you, is the moment that we really see a shift in humanity. Is the moment that we really see peace and love and light more fully expressed in the world. Now, the best example that has been given, in the past I remember when I first came to Unity, they were like, oh, well, God is the ocean and we are the drop. Anybody heard that before? That drop felt a little too small for me, right? Like, it just felt a little too small. So now we're playing with, in Ellen Davenport's book, she says we're more like the wave. We're the wave of the ocean. We each have our own way of sort of showing up, but our nature is the same. The attributes of the water within the wave is the same as in the ocean. And we are the expression. And I love that imagery because it really does bring about sort of like this like idea of the calm ocean that then gets pushed out into the world through each of us. But how much of that can we really own? Ask yourself, if God is the ocean and I am the wave, what do I want to carry with me? What do I want to bring to the shore? What attributes of God do I truly want to embody? Now, we have to look for that though, right? And we have to constantly, it's a constant practice. We're going to get into the practices next week with the third, fourth, and fifth unity principles. But in even just acknowledging the first two, it is a practice. It is an opportunity for us to continue to look for our good and our own divinity and our own Christhood. There was an old Hindu legend. Some of you may have heard of this before. And there was a time where all human beings were gods. But it was said that humans abused their divinity. And so Brahma, the chief god, decided to take away the divinity from people and hide it somewhere where they could never find it. And so he brought all these other gods together and asked them to think about where we should hide it. And so one of them says, well, let's bury it deep in the earth. And Brahma answered, well, humans like to dig. And so they will dig into the earth and they will find it. And so another god says, well, let's put it into the ocean. And Brahma says, well, humans want to explore. I'm sure they're going to go deep into the ocean at some point and find it. So then another one says, well, let's put it in the tallest mountain and put it there for people not to find. And Brahman says, humans like to climb. They will reach that mountain top and they will find it. And so after a few moments of silence, Brahma says, we will hide their divinity deep into the center of their own being. Humans will search for it here and there, but they won't look for the divinity inside their true selves. It was said that all the gods agreed that this was the perfect hiding spot, and the deed was done. And since then, humans have been going up and down mountains, deep into the ocean, far as you can see, and still are searching for something that was never lost. The divinity lies within us. Now, maybe our experience in the relative world was meant for us to not abuse the divinity that is within us. Maybe the hurt, maybe the challenges were meant so that we didn't hurt and challenge others. Maybe the way that we didn't fully know our truth was to open us up wide to receive our truth and live it more fully. Whatever has happened in the relative world, whatever is happening in the relative world that is causing friction, difficulty, challenge, hurt, fear, stress, maybe they're all meant to just really allow us the space to remember that when we do find our divinity, we're not going to abuse it. We're going to honor it. We are going to cherish it. And we are going to live it more fully. Divinity lies within us. As it says in Colossians, Christ in you, the hope of glory. And as it says in John 10, verse 34, Jesus himself said, Jesus answered them, "Is it not written in your law, I have said that you are God's?" It's time that we not only stop searching outside of us, but search within and unleash that which we find into the world and raise the veil between the absolute and spiritual realm and the relative realm. The moment that we are willing to raise that veil is the moment that we will know absolute good as our way of being and absolute good as the playground by which we live. Thank you and namaste. Thank you so much for visiting our YouTube channel. We post new videos every week to keep you positive, present, and inspired to your divinity. Please click on the subscribe button below and also that notification bell. Remember to share this with your friends and your family, those that you know will be inspired just like you have been. And always remember that we love you, that we bless you, that we behold the Christ in you, and we see you doing great things. Thanks and take care.